basic strategy is to become metabolically flexible, which I discussed in my previous book, Fat for Fuel. That is the primary issue. And you do that with a simple step that doesn't cost anything, saves you money, and radically improves your health. What is that? Compress your eating window. When I give a lecture, I feel I succeeded if I can get that one single message to the audience. Compress your eating window, and you're a big fan of that, and have been actually much before I understood that fact. So so what's a compressed eating window? 12 hours, which 90% of people aren't doing, is not enough, I think. 14 hours probably starts to get the benefit, and I think a sweet spot is 16 to 18. The human species was never designed to have access to food 24/7. Just that wasn't the case. So we have to replicate that pattern if we want to maximize our biological benefits and what our genetics are designed for. The most powerful metabolic intervention I've ever seen in nearly 4 decades of clinical practice was multiple day water fasting. I mean, it's profound benefits. We could talk a bit about that if you haven't discussed that previously. But so I decided to write a book, which was Keto Fast. And as I started to research the book and discuss and network with some of the experts in the field, I realized that was an incorrect observation. It is a powerful intervention. There's no question. It's been done for thousands of years. It's an integral part of virtually every major religion on the planet. And it wouldn't persist for so long if there wasn't some value to it. Clearly, there's value. But what I learned is that it was useful historically, but we've evolved into the 21st century. And not as a species, but more our technology. And as a result of the technology, we've accumulated not thousands, but tens of thousands of these chemicals, industrial chemicals that we're all exposed to. It's virtually impossible not to be. I mean, it is. Virtually everyone watching this is. I mean, you'd have to be in a remote, rural, isolated part of the planet and that's, no one watching this. So anyway, most of these chemicals are fat soluble, and they get stored. They typically aren't immediately metabolized. They're stored for safety in your fat cells. Right. And when you do multi-day water fasting, you're using your fat for energy, and then these fat soluble toxins are released, go into your bloodstream, and they cause side effects for a number of reasons. One, because they're toxic, but primarily because the people don't have ramped up enough detoxification to address that. So I thought that was a massive flaw, and I developed strategies to accommodate for this and essentially develop the 21st century fasting, which has multiple other benefits, side effects and benefits I can discuss. There are sea otters or some types of sea life that regularly fast just as a part of their natural ecology, and they've done observational studies of this, and they do assays of the fat soluble toxins in their system and heavy metals, and they go through the roof when they're not eating. It's the same darn process. It's intrinsic to all animal life, I believe. Yeah, one of the reasons I'm so excited about water fasting was because it activates this metabolic process called autophagy, which comes from the Greek words auto and phagon. It essentially means self-eating. And it's to me, one of the most valuable benefits of fasting. And you're able to, what that process does, there's several types: microautophagy, chaperone-mediated autophagy, and macroautophagy, which is mostly what we're concerned about. But essentially, it targets these subcellular structures, like damaged proteins or mitochondria, and it targets them, and they get the lysosomes attached to them, and it really self-destructs it. It breaks it down to its constituent parts so you can recycle them and reuse them rather than hanging around, like in most people, wrecking up your system and actually creating inflammatory cytokines and causing increased silent inflammation throughout your body, which is a massive prescription for metabolic disaster. So activating autophagy is really important. And you certainly are familiar with NAD+, as one of the most important coenzymes in your body, and then its cousin, NADPH, which is so important for recharging your intracellular antioxidants like glutathione and all the rest of them, vitamin C, vitamin E. But those actually increase, get this, when you fast, 30%. 30%. It's crazy. There's nothing you have to do. You don't have to take nicotinamide riboside or take NAD plus IVs. You just increase it when you fast. How good is that? And some of these interventions are really expensive. NAD is not cheap. So that's a huge benefit. And then the other side is what is really, to me, equally as important as autophagy, but you have to understand how to cycle these in, is the magic occurs from fasting, not so much when you're not eating. It's just like exercise. The magic from exercise doesn't occur when you're working out. That's when you cause the damage, right? You get so it's somewhat similar to causing damage when you're fasting. The magic occurs when you refeed, when you re-eat, and you give your body all this nutrition so they can rebuild your cells. You know, you're building your cells over again the way they were designed to be from the original template. So it's the combination of those and cycling them in a right fashion that's so profoundly powerful to improve your health. Time-restricted eating is just the window. Another term is intermittent fasting. They're essentially the same term. But intermittent fasting technically could be considered a broader range. It could be alternate day fasting, like Christine Verde. I didn't realize how powerful her intervention was, and it was partly through her work, alternate day fasting, which is essentially 500 calories one day and then your normal food the next day. She was totally oblivious, absolutely clueless as to the quality of the food, but her strategy was exemplary. And she's a really good researcher too. She just didn't understand the details about health like we do. And then there is Fasting Mimicking Diet by Walter Longo, who's in your neck of the woods, I think. And he's probably the most prolific researcher in this area. So the reason he did not recommend multi-day water fasting was because of compliance. And, when I first heard that, I said, oh, well, with your thick Italian accents, how could you convince anyone to be compliant to a water fast diet? but then I realized he was right. You probably get less than 1% of the people to do that. They're just not going to do it. And even if their life depended on it, they're not going to do it. They just won't. So compliance is a big issue. But here's the other benefit of doing this keto fasting, which is a partial fast. And I'll explain in great detail what that consists of. Okay. But essentially you can do it because it's so easy to do. You can do it twice a week, which means you can do it more than 100 times a year and get all the magnificent benefits I described earlier, and I'm sure that you describe in your book, 100 times a year, rather than doing it, in 5, 10, 15 times a year. So collectively, you're just radically improving the metabolic benefits by this type of intervention and strategy. And in addition, when you do only a partial fast, which is essentially a 2-day fast, it's a little bit less than a 2-day fast instead of a 5-day fast, or a fasting mimicking diet, which in Walter Longo's case is 1,000 calories the first day and 750 the next 4. It's still not enough, and you're still pretty beat up by the 5th day, and it's really hard to get into the scoop of things, because another benefit that I did not mention earlier of fasting, on the day you are fasting, your recovery rate or recovery index, as Aura terms it, goes through the roof. Typically it goes up 10 or 20 points, which means that the next day after you've done your fast, you are just energized, you're ready to kill it, and you can do an unbelievable workout and really challenge your body and activate the switches to turn on muscle growth, something that we call anabolism, which you don't want to do when you're fasting. And the cool thing is that when you are fasting, your growth hormone goes up by 300%. Now, you might say, well, growth hormone increases IGF-1. Doesn't that suppress autophagy? And normally it does, but when you're fasting, the receptors in the liver become relatively resistant, so your growth hormone can be high and your IGF-1 is still low. So what does that mean when you have high growth hormone? It means when you work out and you have high growth hormone, my gosh, it's like taking steroid shots. So you get all this benefit. So it gives you the opportunity to really add an exercise program on top of the autophagy, because you want to exercise when you're fasting, and then right after you're fasting, you feast. You have loads of branched chain amino acids, loads of healthy carbohydrates, and you're just having a party. It's great. And the beautiful thing about it, and you know this, once you're fasting, the other side benefit, in addition to the mental clarity, is that the hunger disappears. You don't even think about it once you have that restricted window of 6 to 8 hours. It becomes as easy as can be. And it gives you this opportunity for really significant muscle gain. Because when you get to be our age and even older, sarcopenia, or the loss of muscle fiber, becomes a real serious issue. And that's why the recommendations for protein intake actually increase as you get older, just to compensate for this loss of muscle mass. And so you have to be really diligent and focused and concentrated on strategies that can help prevent that from being a real issue for you. 80%. That's almost everyone. It's the rare person who doesn't have a problem. So they are metabolically inflexible, insulin resistant.
Correct.
And essentially all of those people, that's 4/5 of the population, are not activating autophagy. You cannot activate autophagy when you're insulin resistant. It's just like, you can't. It just doesn't work metabolically. So the people who can't, virtually, from my perspective, you might have a little wider intermittent fasting window, but I mean, you could potentially make a cause for it in pregnant women, or certainly people with eating disorders, but probably if you're careful, you can get away with it. It's the partial fasting, the complete restriction of the calories, the 300, 400 calories, where if you're underweight, you have an eating disorder, or you're pregnant or breastfeeding, it's probably not a good idea, especially breastfeeding, because that's an anabolic, muscle-building, tissue-building state. And the last thing you want to do is impair that by fasting. The keto flu, so-called, is typically a result of sodium depletion or electrolyte depletion, and it can easily be compensated for with salt. And it's not too much of an issue, because in the keto fast, and we can start to go into how I do it or recommend it, is that I don't recommend anyone do it until you are first metabolically flexible. And what does that mean? It means that you can restrict your eating window to 6 or 8 hours. Only time you're eating, no butter in your coffee or anything outside that window. The only calories you have are in that 6 to 8 hour window, and you can do that for 1 month straight. And most everyone will be metabolically flexible by the end of that period, but there are some who may not. If they're really seriously metabolically damaged or 200-300 pounds overweight, then you're going to need a longer period. But most people, that's all you need. And how do you know? You'll know because you're making ketones, and it's real easy to measure. You can do them in your breath and your urine. Best one is the blood. The blood test I like is the Keto Mojo, which, because it's the least expensive, it's only $1 a strip instead of $4 a strip. So that's how you can objectively test it, and you don't really need to go there unless you're massively overweight, because most likely you're going to be metabolically flexible, and then you could participate. So then I think there's virtually no contraindications other than the ones I previously listed.
Okay. All right. I want to touch on something that you and I both agree on, and the food safety, particularly the dangerous biocides, the pesticides. And you're my favorite, glyphosate, Roundup.
I'm going through reading about 2,000 studies a year now, the full study, not just the abstract. And the 80 keywords that I'm looking at are all for longevity and subvariants of it. So this is an area I'm beyond passionate about. So I'm do the fundamental basics, because right now the best we can do to hope to do is live to 120 in pretty good shape, because that's exactly where no one's living beyond that now with our current technology. So, and I think if just do the basics, and I wrote Fat for Fuel, get metabolically flexible. I wrote keto fasting, do the partial fasting, get the benefits of autophagy, get the rejuvenation benefits. The other thing is it does activate your stem cells, so that when you're rebuilding and getting all the extra carbs and the good branched chain amino acids, and you've exercised, those stem cells are activated and they go into rebuild the tissues. That's exactly what you need to do. So you get that thing going. Thirdly, you've got to stay away from EMF. These are sort of the primal three ones that, because almost everyone doesn't understand the importance. And I'm really spending lots of time in writing this new book, and hopefully it'll be out either late this year or early next year. I'm almost finished writing it, and helping people understand why it actually it goes back to NAD, which is the fundamental core of why the CMF exposure is such an issue. And NAD is required as a substrate for PARP, poly-ADP ribose polymerase, to repair the DNA damage. It lays down the matrix for the DNA enzymes, repair enzymes, to come in and work. And every time you have a single stranded break, it sucks out two or three NAD plus molecules. And you do that for a while and NAD levels go down into the toilet and you just can't, this NAD to NADH ratio, the NADPH goes crazy and you just suffer premature aging. It's crazy. I forget the specific numbers, but it's like